Chair, can I split it into 2 trees? You might.
Yeah, it's your 6 minutes to whatever way you want.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I'd just like to start with Cara and her dad. I just want to start by saying very clearly, Cara, I think you're extraordinary. Your advocacy, your honesty, your love for your brothers Neil and John is just palpable, and I think you're a complete inspiration. And I think back at myself at your age, and my God, you throw rings around me, so well done. But I suppose age doesn't matter when it comes to important issues, and you have spoken for many thousands of people spanning many age groups, and you do deserve our thanks. Cara, just to pare things back, in your own words, what would your ideal assessment of needs process be? If you could have a magic wand, can you just say specifically what that would be, and how do you think we could get to that stage? Another question would be, if you were back again, would you do it all again? Would you go on this road? And last question is, are you pleased with what has happened so far with regards to your lobbying and your fighting?
Firstly, I just want to say that I think my dream in life would be that the government would stop breaking the law and that they would assess children within the legal 6 months limit, and that the children wouldn't be rotting on a waiting list for 5 to 6 years. And that's the big aim here, that the government would stop allowing, that the government would stop allowing the HSE to break the law and systematically smash the law. And that these children wouldn't rot on waiting lists anymore. There wouldn't be any permanent damage being caused to children, and that their email would be responded to within the 3 months of their application, and that the child would be assessed within 6 months. And look, listen, the last 2-3 years I've spent campaigning for disabled people who cannot fight back for themselves, and it's been some journey, and I would absolutely go back and do it again, because the best thing I've ever done was getting involved in this, because since around the age of 6 I've always got a little bit of joy and happiness from kind of helping other people, and being able to help other people, especially when I got the 10 million euros worth of government funding last October, and nearly 3.5 children got an assessment of needs and weren't rotting on a waiting list anymore because of that. And while it's only a small drop in the ocean, I think that I'm just so happy that to be able to make a difference and to be able to try and help as many people as I can, and that the dream is that the government would stop breaking the law and that they will comply within the 6 months, and that kids who cannot fight back for themselves would no longer have to be rotting on a waiting list, and that they would not be treated as second-class citizens, but that they would be treated like any other citizen in Ireland. Because me and my 2 brothers live in the same country, and it's called Ireland, but we live in 2 very different places at the same time, because I have loads of friends, I play loads of sports, and everything is laid out for me. I'm just a normal 14-year-old with a great life ahead. But my 2 brothers, Neil and John, they get treated like second-class citizens, and they're rotting away. And it's so hard to watch, and it's all just because they have a disability. And I think that needs to end, and that disabled people can no longer be treated differently, and that they need to be assessed on the waiting list, and that they should not be left to rot, and that it's so wrong, and that determines me every single day to come up here and fight for not just my brothers, but for the thousands of children and families who are too scared to speak up to the government or can't speak up.
Thank you, Cara. Thank you, John.
We'll move on to, and just remind everybody, there will be time to go around again, so you'll have more time to come back in again.
Okay. So the DPO, thanks very much for coming in here this morning. It's great to see 5 organisations working together. It's a fantastic idea. I suppose similar aims, coming from different backgrounds and sharing ideas and combining ideas, so well done. I'd like to acknowledge the critical insight you shared in the opening statement, and co-creation definitely requires investment. It's not an abstract value. It's practice dependent on infrastructure, time, resources, and the need for sustainable funding for DPO for staff, Irish sign language, translation, policy capacity and reasonable accommodations is urgent and valid. And I would certainly be very happy to meet with you again. And I think you make a great point that I suppose we maybe should have involved the stakeholders more when we were planning our plan of works, So definitely for me, it's a lesson learned, and it's something that just didn't dawn on me. I suppose I've worked with people with disabilities in another life, and so I kind of know what's going on, but certainly I think we should have involved you more. So a great idea, and certainly apologies from myself. And just a few questions. What legislative changes would your network like to see in the coming years to better support disabled people? The second question, in your experience, how has the lived reality of disabled people changed in Ireland over the last decade? And how can we as a committee work with you to ensure that real changes does happen? And the last question, given your extensive experience in disability advocacy and your work, what specific recommendations would you make to ensure successful implementation of the new National Disability Inclusion Strategy? And how can we ensure it's effectively actioned, monitored, and that it delivers real impact for disabled people in Ireland? Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, if I could maybe just respond in relation to effective implementation. And, you know, we're currently in meetings with the Department of Children, Disability and Equality about the structures of engagement. So it's still of the moment, and we've been working through a process of providing guidance from our perspective about what type of engagement in terms of implementation and monitoring will work. But certainly this committee has a role in that, because it gives us a voice around the table. And what's not clear, and maybe could become clearer to us through an engagement about the agenda of the committee, is in relation to what happens after testimony is delivered here. That if we have a strategic thought about how DPOs work with this committee, with a role of monitoring not only the implementation of the National Disability Strategy, but CRPD in general, that if we have a shared strategy around that, then this committee becomes more effective in relation to what you can do next. And at the moment, you know, we've had some great interactions with the previous committee and prepared submissions and opening statements, but what's lacking is a little bit about a strategy about what happens next, and we need your support on that. You need our support on that, so we'd really welcome being able to come together on that. Davy, do you have any comments in relation to maybe the Acts?
Yes, again, pointing out that the Disability Act does need to be reviewed. The Irish Human Rights Equality Commission Act of 2014, Article 10, Section 2B is a provision for IREC to review not only pending legislation but existing legislation from an equality and human rights perspective. We can admit that the Disability Act, and particularly Sections 8 and 9, do not work. And we now have this situation where we have extensive waiting lists, and going back to Deputy Keogh's question, we're now almost asking the question, which do we prioritise? I think we need to also reflect on this, that disabled children become disabled adults. And we need to create a conversation where disabled adults are empowered through their DPOs to inform that policy perspective. I know personally, been accountable to our members, when we're using language like permanently damaged, we need to be talking about systems and support. Nobody is damaged. We need to be talking about the opportunities to be involved in education, to be involved in our communities. So we need to be very careful that the Disability Act is through a very medicalised approach. It even uses the term around the assessment need around to ameliorate the disability. So it's going back to that cure and care. So it's totally outdated. So what are we assessing here? Like in the form of disabilities back when this act was been raised, and this is to point out that disabled people had issues then around the assessment of need, we're saying it should be around transition points. What are the supports young disabled people are going to need when they're going into education, when they're coming out of education? So it's about those supports, as opposed to, there is a real danger in driving at an early age the assessment, the clinical assessment, that we're going to say, this is who you are now. And it's ignoring the fact that talk to disabled adults. When the opportunities are there, when the systems are put in place, disabled people, unlike this act is saying back 20 years ago, cannot be employed, cannot participate in social and cultural life, can and do. But it's about empowering and enabling that participation, not going back to putting people into a clinical diagnostic box.
You're way